Imagine a life built on trust, love, and shared dreams. You wake up every morning next to the person you've pledged to spend forever with. Your home is full of laughter, and you share plans for a future that seems too perfect to ever shatter. But what happens when that trust is betrayed in the most devastating way possible? What if the person you loved most didn't just betray you with a secret affair but betrayed you with something that could change your life forever? This is the story of Caleb Walker, a man who thought his perfect life had everything, until he learned that his wife, Emma, had been hiding a devastating truth. A secret affair with her boss. A betrayal that didn't just crush his heart, it threatened his very survival. And when Caleb found out, it wasn't just the affair that shattered his world, it was the revelation that he had been unknowingly infected with HIV. But the betrayal didn't stop there. Caleb's response, born out of pain and anger, would lead him down a dark path of revenge, one that would change both their lives forever. Emma and Caleb Walker had always appeared to be the ideal couple. Their life seemed like a well-crafted narrative, one that could easily be imagined as a perfect story. They had met during their college years, at a time when they were both filled with big dreams and an unshakable sense of optimism. Caleb was a quiet, reserved young man with an easy smile, a software engineer by trade, whose love for his work was matched only by his dedication to Emma. Emma, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of energy. She was ambitious, outgoing, and effortlessly charismatic. Their connection was instant. It felt like fate had drawn them together. They complemented each other in ways that made their bond seem inseparable. Their marriage, celebrated by friends and family, was just as flawless. In the small town of Maplewood, they were admired for their partnership. Caleb's steady job at a tech firm and Emma's rise to a senior management position made them the envy of many. They were known for their vacations to exotic locations, their love for quiet evenings at home, and their ability to host dinner parties where the conversations flowed as smoothly as the wine. But beneath the surface of their idyllic life, cracks were beginning to form. For Caleb, those cracks weren't immediately noticeable. He was content in his work, content in his marriage. But Emma, ever the driven one, had begun to feel restless. Her promotion to a high-ranking position at her tech company was supposed to be the culmination of everything she had worked for. It was a milestone, a recognition of her skills and talents. But with that promotion came long hours, increased stress, and a level of responsibility that left Emma questioning her true desires. The pressures of her new position began to take a toll on her. The late nights at the office, once seen as a sign of ambition, now felt like a sign of distance. Emma found herself drawn into a world where success seemed to demand more than she had ever anticipated. Her relationship with Caleb, once a sanctuary from the world, started to feel more like a weight than a comfort. The small, intimate moments they had once shared were slowly replaced with conversations about deadlines, meetings, and work-related stress. The passion they once had began to fade, replaced by a quiet, growing discontent that neither could fully articulate. It was during one of those late office nights that Emma first crossed paths with Veronica Gray, her boss. Veronica was a woman of power, someone who commanded attention the moment she walked into a room. With her sharp intellect and ruthless drive in the boardroom, she was everything Emma admired professionally. But Veronica's personal life was far more complicated. She had been married for years, but her relationship with her husband was strained. There were rumors. Whispers that floated around the office, that Veronica's marriage was hanging by a thread, that she was involved in affairs of her own. These rumors were dismissed by most as mere gossip. But there was a subtle intensity between Emma and Veronica that couldn't be ignored. It wasn't just professional respect, it was something more, something unspoken, a tension that neither woman could quite put a name to at first. Veronica's presence had a magnetic effect on Emma. She was an enigma, confident, commanding, yet emotionally distant. It wasn't long before they began spending more time together, working late into the night on project proposals, discussing strategy, and bouncing ideas off one another. What started as a professional relationship began to blur the lines into something much more personal. At first, Emma told herself it was harmless. Late meetings, casual dinners to discuss work, the occasional drink after a long day, nothing that could potentially jeopardize her life with Caleb. But it wasn't long before the dynamic between them shifted. The change was subtle, almost imperceptible. Veronica, with her experience and poise, began to offer Emma more than just professional advice. She became a confidant, someone Emma could turn to for personal support. Emma, in turn, found herself seeking Veronica's presence more and more, drawn to the older woman's assuredness, her way of taking charge in every situation. As Emma confided in Veronica about the struggles in her marriage, Veronica shared her own troubles, her crumbling marriage, her emotional turmoil, her sense of longing that she had buried deep inside. It was this shared vulnerability that started to form a bond between them, one that Emma couldn't deny. But in hindsight, there were moments that should have served as warnings. There were times when Emma should have pulled back, should have questioned whether this was truly the right path. Veronica's cold detachment at times should have been a red flag, a sign that she wasn't in this for the same reasons Emma was. Veronica was, after all, a woman with her own complicated history, a history that Emma was only beginning to understand. The longer they spent together, the more Emma began to feel something unfamiliar stirring within her. The warmth of Veronica's touch lingered longer than it should have, the glances they exchanged carried more weight than just a simple conversation. By the time Emma realized the depth of her feelings for Veronica, it was already too late. She had crossed a line that, once crossed, couldn't be undone. Veronica's affections, once subtle, became more direct. There was a night when the two women shared a kiss, the intensity of it overwhelming both of them. Emma pulled away first, startled by the sheer force of her emotions. She had always considered herself committed to Caleb, her husband, her partner, but in that moment, the choice she had made was clear. She had fallen for Veronica, and there was no turning back. What followed was a dangerous dance of secrecy, stolen moments, and guilt. Emma knew that what she was doing was wrong, but the desire that Veronica awakened in her was impossible to ignore. The affair, hidden beneath the veneer of professional closeness, became Emma's escape. Veronica offered her something Caleb couldn't, a world of excitement, a world where Emma could be someone else, someone more daring, more alive. But as their affair continued, the risks grew. Emma told herself that it was safe, that Veronica's condition was manageable, that the odds of transmission were low. She convinced herself that everything would be fine, that there was nothing to fear. Veronica had reassured her, "I'm undetectable," she said, but Emma couldn't shake the nagging doubt that lingered in the back of her mind. As the months passed, Emma began to notice changes in her body. Fatigue, unexplained rashes, and a weight loss that she couldn't explain. She brushed it off at first, attributing it to stress and long hours at work. But when the symptoms persisted, she finally made an appointment with her doctor. The tests came back positive. Emma was HIV positive. The truth hit her like a ton of bricks. Her world, once so perfectly constructed, began to crumble. But even in the face of this devastation, she couldn't bring herself to tell Caleb. She had already betrayed him emotionally. How could she tell him that she had unknowingly put his life at risk? That the affair she had fought so hard to keep hidden had now resulted in the ultimate betrayal? And so, Emma kept the secret, struggling to live with the guilt and shame that weighed on her every day. But Caleb, ever observant, began to notice the distance growing between them. The once vibrant woman he had married was now distant and distracted. It wasn't long before Caleb's suspicions began to grow. His once happy marriage was now a shadow of what it had been. Emma's secrets were starting to unravel in ways neither of them could control. The discovery of the crime that would devastate both Caleb and Emma Walker's lives did not come suddenly. It was an insidious unmasking, beginning with a slow unraveling of trust and ending in a dramatic confrontation that would change everything. It all started with a phone call, a seemingly innocent, routine evening between Emma and Veronica that Caleb unknowingly overheard. Emma, ever the professional, had left her phone on speaker mode while preparing dinner, not realizing that the conversation she was about to have would be the catalyst for everything that followed. In the call, Veronica's voice was clear and measured, but the tension in her words was undeniable. Caleb, curious about the unusual tone, wandered closer to the conversation. As Veronica discussed some minor business details with Emma, she then shifted into a more personal subject. Caleb could hear Veronica talking about their affair, the one Emma had worked so hard to keep hidden. Veronica's voice dropped, filled with a mix of guilt and certainty as she shared her struggles, but the words that followed made Caleb freeze. "I can't believe she hasn't told him yet. I can't believe I infected her." The mention of infection stopped Caleb in his tracks. His blood ran cold. The final, chilling sentence Veronica uttered made Caleb's worst fears feel terrifyingly real. "I told her I'm undetectable. But you know the risks. She knows the risks." In that moment, Caleb felt a rising nausea. The room around him seemed to blur, his pulse quickening as the magnitude of what he had just heard set in. He quickly turned off the speaker, his hands shaking, and confronted Emma immediately. The room felt suffocating as the truth, hidden behind lies and half-truths for months, crashed down on him like a tidal wave. He demanded answers, demanded to know what had been going on. Emma, caught in the web of her own deceit, hesitated. Her heart pounded in her chest as the guilt suffocated her. She tried to explain, tried to dismiss the severity of the situation, but it was too late. Caleb, now fully aware, wasn't willing to listen to the justifications. The betrayal he had already suspected had now been confirmed, and the reality of the situation was far worse than he had ever imagined. Emma didn't just cheat on him, she had put his life at risk in the worst possible way. The next few days were filled with a whirlwind of emotions. Caleb, still grappling with the anger, hurt, and confusion, sought answers, but Emma was too broken to give him what he wanted. Her silence was as much a betrayal as the affair itself. She had been too afraid to face the consequences of her actions, too paralyzed by the shame of her choices. She didn't even consider telling Caleb about her HIV diagnosis until it was already too late. It wasn't until Caleb insisted that she get tested that the truth finally came out. Emma's blood work confirmed what everyone had feared: she was HIV positive. Worse still, it was confirmed that Caleb had been unknowingly exposed to the virus. He was devastated. In that moment, the foundation of their marriage cracked, leaving only the debris of trust and respect that had once bound them together. Caleb, devastated as he was, knew what he had to do. He needed proof. He needed to understand the full scope of what had transpired. Determined to get to the bottom of this mess, he contacted his attorney, and together, they sought legal guidance on how to move forward. A case for legal action, one that could charge Emma with recklessness or even worse, could be built. But Caleb was not content to simply settle for legal justice. He wanted something deeper, something that would make Emma understand the magnitude of her betrayal. Meanwhile, in the small suburban town of Maplewood, the news about Emma's affair slowly started to leak out. Friends, neighbors, and even some of their closest family members began to hear rumors. The local community, once enamored by the picture-perfect couple, now found themselves whispering in the aisles of grocery stores and during casual conversations at the local coffee shop. What had once been a love story was now a scandal that shocked everyone who knew them. The media's attention grew as more details surfaced. Emma's position at a prestigious tech company drew the interest of reporters who pounced on the scandal like vultures. Caleb, who had tried to keep a low profile, found himself at the center of a media frenzy. The press were relentless in their pursuit of the story, framing it as a tale of betrayal, danger, and heartbreak. Some outlets even speculated about the nature of the affair, wondering if Caleb had known about it all along and turned a blind eye. The increasing media storm took its toll. Emma's career, already on shaky ground, began to crumble under the weight of the accusations. As soon as her affair and the HIV transmission became public knowledge, the company she worked for took swift action. The board held an emergency meeting to assess the situation. It wasn't long before Emma's resignation was demanded. The public backlash was swift and unforgiving. Caleb, still dealing with the aftermath of his own infection, began to focus on one thing: retribution. His sense of betrayal festered, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't just walk away from the wreckage Emma had caused. Her life had already been shattered by the affair's exposure, but he wasn't satisfied. He wanted more. He wanted her to understand what it meant to lose everything. The police, meanwhile, had started to look deeper into the situation. Emma's betrayal had moved beyond a personal affair, it was now a public health issue. Law enforcement officials had to decide whether Caleb had grounds for any sort of criminal charge against Emma. They investigated whether Emma's lack of disclosure about her HIV status could be considered criminal negligence or recklessness. The investigation into the affair was slow, deliberate, and thorough. Caleb was interviewed as a key witness, though he was reluctant to speak at first. His mind, clouded by a mixture of grief and rage, struggled to make sense of the nightmare. When the detectives asked him about his own experience, how long he had known about the affair, what he had seen or heard in the weeks leading up to the revelation, he responded only with a few sharp, painful words. But those words were enough to push the investigation forward. Police interviews with colleagues at Emma's workplace led to statements about her behavior, the long hours at the office, and the gossip that circulated about the affair. Veronica, too, was questioned, although she declined to offer any detailed testimony, invoking her right to silence, which only intensified the mystery surrounding the affair. Amidst the public scrutiny, Emma's life was dismantled. Her reputation, once sterling, was tarnished beyond recognition. Veronica, for her part, seemed to disappear from the public eye entirely, leaving behind only the fragments of a once secret relationship that had exploded into the public consciousness. But it was Caleb who remained in the media spotlight, portrayed as the victim in the tragedy. His story was one of heartbreak, loss, and a deep sense of betrayal, a man who had built his life on the foundation of love and trust, only to see it all come crumbling down. As the weeks went by, and the investigations continued, Caleb became more and more determined to exact his own form of justice. But the question remained, what kind of justice could ever be enough? The legal storm that followed Emma and Caleb Walker's scandalous fall from grace was as intense and unpredictable as the affair that had started it all. What began as a personal betrayal between husband and wife quickly spiraled into a legal battle that would captivate the media, disrupt their small-town lives, and expose both the darkest corners of their private lives and the potential consequences of their actions. It wasn't just about a marriage fractured by infidelity, it was now about recklessness, public health, and the complicated questions of accountability in the modern age. It wasn't long after Caleb's emotional breakdown and the public uproar that authorities began to take a closer look at the circumstances surrounding Emma's affair with Veronica. The case, though highly personal, had all the makings of a criminal matter. When it became clear that Caleb had unknowingly been exposed to HIV due to his wife's actions, the local police department sought legal counsel to determine if criminal charges should be pursued. The weight of the public health implications was significant, and with the media attention mounting, the authorities were under immense pressure to act swiftly. Emma's arrest came quietly one cold November morning. She had returned home from a meeting with her lawyer when the knock came at her door. A team of officers stood outside, and despite the fact that Emma had already lost much of what she had once taken for granted, her face still showed signs of shock. She had been living under a cloud of guilt and anxiety for weeks, but this moment felt like the final blow. It wasn't just the betrayal that had destroyed her life, it was the legal consequences that had come crashing down on her now. The charges were serious: criminal negligence and reckless endangerment. Emma's failure to disclose her HIV status to Caleb, despite being aware of the risks involved in their sexual relationship, had put him in grave danger. It was clear that the affair with Veronica had been the catalyst for Emma's diagnosis, but the implications of her actions weren't as simple as infidelity or betrayal. This was about whether she had endangered her husband's life through her silence. Criminal negligence, according to the prosecution, meant that Emma had acted in a way that exposed Caleb to an avoidable risk, knowing full well the consequences of her behavior. The fact that she had continued her affair with Veronica, despite being told about the risks of HIV transmission, compounded the seriousness of the situation. She had not only failed to protect Caleb's health, but she had also, in the eyes of the prosecution, intentionally withheld the information that could have protected him. But there was another layer to this case, one that added complexity and tension. Veronica Gray, the other woman involved, had also been questioned and potentially faced charges of her own. The question that lingered in the air was whether Veronica had known she was HIV positive and whether she had actively hidden her status from Emma in a similar manner. Veronica's silence only fueled suspicions, as the lack of transparency made the public and the media view her actions as equally, if not more, malicious. The defense, however, was adamant in their position. They argued that Emma's failure to disclose her HIV status was a mistake born of fear and shame, not malicious intent. They contended that she was terrified of losing everything, her marriage, her career, her dignity, and, as a result, she made the decision to hide her diagnosis, even though it had placed Caleb at risk. It wasn't an act of cruelty, they said, it was the desperate act of a woman consumed by guilt and self-loathing. The prosecution, however, wasn't swayed. They countered that Emma's decision wasn't simply about protecting her marriage, it was about a lack of consideration for her husband's well-being. The law, in their eyes, was clear. Ignorance of risk didn't absolve one from responsibility, especially when it involved public health. From the moment the charges were announced, the media frenzy surrounding Emma and Caleb grew exponentially. The town of Maplewood, once known for its tranquility, was now under the media microscope. Journalists, eager to sensationalize every aspect of the case, descended on the courthouse. Cameras followed Emma as she entered the court, capturing every moment of her humiliation. Her face, once admired for its warmth and charm, now seemed like the face of someone whose life had spiraled out of control. The case captivated the public for weeks. People were polarized. Some saw Emma as a victim of her own poor decisions, trapped in a web of guilt and shame that led her to make a catastrophic mistake. Others, especially those who followed the case closely, viewed her actions as unforgivable. The media, for their part, had no interest in exploring the complexity of the situation. Instead, they leaned into the drama, focusing on the scandalous affair and the shocking nature of the charges. The headlines were filled with questions about Emma's culpability and whether Caleb would be able to rebuild his life after the devastating betrayal. But there was a twist in the media narrative. As the court proceedings continued, Caleb began to speak more publicly about the emotional toll the ordeal had taken on him. He expressed his anger, but also his sense of profound loss. His interviews painted a picture of a man who, despite everything, still loved Emma in some strange, bittersweet way. This unexpected vulnerability became a talking point in the media. Many viewers, especially those who followed the couple's story from the beginning, were conflicted. How could someone so deeply hurt still express empathy for the person who had destroyed their world? The legal battle was starting to attract attention from legal analysts as well. They began to discuss the potential precedents this case might set. If Emma were convicted, would it set a new standard for how HIV transmission cases were treated in court? Would it influence how consent and sexual health were discussed in the future? It was a case that blurred the lines between personal responsibility and criminal negligence, and it felt like the world was watching as the courts tried to navigate the legal and moral complexities. Just when it seemed like the case couldn't get any more complicated, a twist emerged. Veronica Gray, once a quiet participant in the affair, suddenly became a key figure in the investigation. Police uncovered emails and private messages between her and Emma that were chilling in their implication. It was revealed that Veronica had known about her HIV status long before Emma had ever become involved with her. This raised new questions. Had Veronica deliberately hidden the truth from Emma? Was she also legally responsible for what had happened? The prosecution jumped on this revelation, suggesting that Veronica, too, had been culpable. They argued that she had failed to disclose her HIV status to Emma in a meaningful way, potentially exacerbating the situation. Some even considered the possibility that Veronica's behavior bordered on coercion, given the power dynamic at play in their professional relationship. However, Veronica's legal team denied these allegations, claiming that Emma had never asked her directly about her health and that any implications of malice were purely speculative. Meanwhile, Caleb, having endured the constant media exposure, found himself under increasing pressure. The stress of the legal proceedings, coupled with the public scrutiny, began to take its toll on his emotional health. He became withdrawn, avoiding interviews and public appearances, preferring to focus on the legal battle instead. But as the case dragged on, and with Emma's defense growing stronger, Caleb found himself questioning whether he could truly move on from this or whether the scars of the betrayal would haunt him forever. The trial of Emma Walker was one of the most highly anticipated courtroom events to take place in the small town of Maplewood. The case, which had already captured the public's attention with its shocking revelations of infidelity, betrayal, and criminal negligence, was now in full swing. With every twist and turn, it felt as though the entire community, and the media, was watching, eagerly waiting for the final outcome. The first day of the trial set the tone for what would become an emotionally charged and dramatic courtroom battle. The prosecutor, a seasoned lawyer known for his unrelenting pursuit of justice, opened the case with a stark and compelling argument. He painted a vivid picture of the betrayal Caleb had suffered, not just emotionally, but physically. He emphasized the grave consequences of Emma's actions, positioning her failure to disclose her HIV status as an act of reckless disregard for her husband's health and safety. The prosecutor wasted no time in drawing a direct link between Emma's affair with Veronica and the chain of events that had led to Caleb's infection. He questioned how anyone could possibly excuse the fact that Emma, fully aware of the risks, had kept her diagnosis a secret, putting Caleb in a vulnerable and life-threatening position. The courtroom was silent as the prosecutor described the intimate details of Emma's affair with Veronica. He even introduced excerpts from text messages between the two women that suggested a calculated effort on Veronica's part to hide her HIV status from Emma. These messages, although not conclusive, painted a picture of manipulation and secrecy that would haunt the defense for the rest of the trial. Emma's defense team, on the other hand, was quick to counter. Their strategy hinged on the argument that Emma's actions were not malicious but were instead driven by fear, shame, and a desire to protect the life she had built. They painted Emma as a woman trapped by her own guilt, someone who had never intended for anyone to be harmed by her mistakes. They argued that Emma had been in a state of denial about her condition and that she had acted out of a misguided attempt to keep her marriage intact. To this end, they called upon a series of expert witnesses to testify about the psychological toll of Emma's affair and the emotional strain of being diagnosed with HIV. The defense even brought in a renowned psychiatrist who spoke about the intense shame and stigma often felt by people who are diagnosed with HIV, emphasizing that Emma's failure to disclose her condition was, in his view, a coping mechanism, not an intentional act of harm. But as the trial wore on, the tension in the courtroom grew. Caleb was called to testify on the stand, and his presence sent a ripple through the audience. For weeks, the public had seen him as the victim, the man who had been betrayed by his wife, who had suffered the emotional and physical consequences of her actions. Now, as he took the stand, the courtroom held its breath. Caleb's testimony was raw and painful. His voice trembled as he spoke about the emotional devastation he had experienced when he first discovered the affair. He described the gut-wrenching moment when he learned that Emma had infected him with HIV. As he spoke, the audience could feel the weight of his anger and betrayal. Caleb's words struck at the core of the case. He described how, in the aftermath of the revelation, he had tried to reach out to Emma, pleading with her for answers, for any sort of explanation. But Emma had been unable to give him the answers he so desperately needed. He spoke of the anger he felt, not just at Emma's affair, but at the selfishness he believed she had shown in withholding her HIV status from him. She destroyed everything, he said, his voice breaking as he recalled the days of sleepless nights, the uncertainty of his diagnosis, and the emotional toll that would stay with him for the rest of his life. For the defense, Caleb's testimony was both a strength and a vulnerability. While it painted Emma's actions in the most damning light, it also highlighted the deep emotional wounds Caleb had suffered. The defense lawyer seized upon this, shifting the focus of the trial back to Emma's mental state and the overwhelming pressure she had been under. They argued that while Caleb's pain was undeniable, Emma's actions were not the result of calculated malice, but the result of a tragic and complex combination of personal guilt and confusion. Then came the moment that would tip the scales in the prosecution's favor, the introduction of a new, shocking piece of evidence. A medical expert, called by the prosecution, testified that Emma's HIV diagnosis had been known to her for months before she ever tested Caleb. Dr. Evelyn Mitchell, a respected virologist, explained that the virus would have been detectable in Emma's blood far before her final diagnosis, evidence that suggested Emma had had ample time to disclose her condition to Caleb before it was too late. The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom. It suggested that Emma had not only been reckless in her actions, but that she had knowingly exposed Caleb to a life-threatening virus without taking the necessary precautions. The prosecution argued that this evidence proved not only negligence but intentional disregard for Caleb's well-being. The defense, caught off guard, attempted to downplay the significance of the expert's testimony, but the damage was done. The jury's perception of Emma's actions had shifted. The public and media were also quick to pick up on the implications of this new evidence. News outlets ran headlines such as, "New Evidence Shocks Court," and "Emma Walker's Secret HIV Diagnosis, Did She Know All Along?" The media frenzy reached new heights, with journalists speculating on the details of Emma's past, her relationship with Veronica, and what motivated her to make such a dangerous decision. The once sympathetic portrayal of Emma began to shift, as the public grew less certain about her motives. The battle over facts became increasingly fierce as the trial neared its end. The defense attempted to call into question the validity of the prosecution's evidence, accusing them of sensationalizing Emma's mistakes. But the prosecution remained steadfast in their conviction that Emma had acted recklessly, putting her husband's life at risk for the sake of preserving her own secrets. After weeks of testimony, shocking evidence, and emotional appeals, the trial came to a close. The jury deliberated for several days, and the tension in the courthouse was palpable. Family members, reporters, and spectators crowded the halls, anxiously awaiting the verdict. It was clear that this case had transcended the personal, it had become a symbol of how far the consequences of one person's actions could reach. When the jury returned, they found Emma Walker guilty of criminal negligence and reckless endangerment. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the judge prepared to read the sentence. Emma, her face pale and drawn, sat motionless in the defendant's chair, her hands trembling in her lap. Caleb, seated in the gallery, could barely contain his emotions. Though he had sought justice for so long, the finality of the verdict left him feeling hollow. He had won, but at what cost? The sentence was harsh. Emma was sentenced to 5 years of probation, mandatory counseling, and community service. In addition, she was ordered to pay restitution to Caleb for medical expenses and emotional distress. While the sentence was not as severe as some had expected, there was no prison time. The judge's decision made it clear that Emma's actions had consequences, even if they could not undo the damage she had caused. The reactions to the verdict were mixed. Caleb, while relieved that justice had been served, was still reeling from the pain of the entire ordeal. The man who had once been in love with Emma now seemed like a stranger to her. He had won a legal victory, but it had come at the cost of his emotional well-being. His family, who had stood by him throughout the trial, remained supportive but knew that Caleb's healing process was just beginning. Emma, on the other hand, was a broken woman. As the weight of her conviction sank in, she realized that the trial had not just stripped her of her career and marriage, but also her sense of self. She had lost the respect of those around her, and the guilt that had already plagued her now became unbearable. She knew she had ruined the life of the person she had once loved, and no verdict could ever change that. The public, for their part, remained divided. Some viewed the trial as a necessary step in holding Emma accountable for her actions, while others sympathized with her struggles. In the end, the case had become more than just about a marriage gone wrong. It had become a reflection of how personal mistakes could have far-reaching consequences, altering the lives of everyone involved. The aftermath of the trial left no one untouched. The lives of Emma and Caleb Walker had been irreparably altered by their choices, the public spectacle of their affair and the subsequent legal proceedings leaving deep emotional scars. The case had raised difficult questions not only about personal responsibility, trust, and betrayal but also about the intersection of love, secrecy, and public health. As time passed, the key figures in the case sought to rebuild their lives, but the impact of the trial, and its consequences, lingered far beyond the courthouse. Caleb Walker had always been a man of reason, a tech engineer who lived a quiet, structured life. Before the affair, he was the epitome of stability. His life with Emma seemed like something from a storybook. But the betrayal that had shattered his world had changed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. While Caleb had won a legal victory, he felt no real sense of triumph. The judgment of the court could not repair the broken pieces of his heart, nor could it undo the months of emotional turmoil and fear that had consumed him. His HIV diagnosis, while manageable, served as a constant reminder of the toll Emma's actions had taken on him. In the wake of the trial, Caleb retreated from the public eye. He left Maplewood, moving to a quieter part of the city where he could begin to heal. He threw himself into his work, though his success in the tech world no longer held the same satisfaction it once did. Caleb had been forced to confront the fragility of life and relationships, and it had given him a new perspective. He sought counseling, working through the anger and loss that still haunted him. Yet, the emotional wounds were far from healed. The guilt and self-doubt that had consumed him after the diagnosis still lingered. He found it difficult to trust anyone again, especially women. His relationships with friends and family, once close, had also become strained. His reputation had been one of respectability, but the betrayal had left him with an unshakable sense of vulnerability. Caleb's healing process was slow, but he remained committed to moving forward. His legal victory, though it provided a sense of justice, couldn't fill the void left by Emma's actions. He often found himself wondering if the pain was truly worth the vengeance. He would never forget what happened, but Caleb knew that in order to truly heal, he had to let go of the anger that had once driven him to seek retribution. Emma Walker found herself on a different journey. Her once promising career in the tech industry had collapsed in the wake of the scandal. Her resignation from the company had been swift, and the media's coverage of her affair and HIV diagnosis left her with no chance of professional redemption. No amount of public apologies or media statements could undo the damage done to her image. Emma's professional life, once marked by ambition and success, was now in ruins. The guilt she felt over what had happened was overwhelming. She had betrayed Caleb, yes, but she had also betrayed herself, her career, and the woman she had once been. In the years following the trial, Emma relocated to a distant town, far from the media circus that had consumed her life. There, she took on a low-profile job, far removed from the world of business and corporate leadership she had once known. She found solace in a small group of friends who knew nothing about her past. It was in this quiet anonymity that Emma began the slow process of rebuilding her life. She attended therapy, working through her feelings of shame and guilt, confronting the reasons why she had allowed herself to make such destructive choices. Despite the passage of time, Emma still struggled with her diagnosis. Her HIV status, once a secret she could barely acknowledge, became a daily reminder of the mistakes she had made. She became an advocate for HIV awareness, speaking publicly about her own experiences, hoping that her story could serve as a lesson for others. She had lost so much, but in the silence of her new life, she found a kind of peace, a place to begin again. Though the weight of her past would never be fully lifted. Veronica Gray, the other woman at the center of the storm, had also retreated from the public eye. Though not charged with any criminal activity, her involvement in the affair had irrevocably tied her to the scandal. Her professional reputation, once formidable, had been deeply tarnished. Veronica had always been a private individual, but the exposure she faced in the wake of the trial left her struggling to maintain any semblance of normalcy. She resigned from her high-ranking position at the tech firm, choosing to withdraw from the corporate world entirely. Veronica's future, much like Emma's, was uncertain. The affair with Emma had been an escape, a way for her to cope with her own fractured personal life. But that escape had come at a heavy cost. Veronica's marriage, already strained, crumbled under the weight of the public scandal, and she found herself alone, isolated by the decisions she had made. Veronica moved to a different state, hoping to distance herself from the ghosts of her past. She began working in a less glamorous field, one that kept her out of the public spotlight. But despite the change in scenery, Veronica couldn't escape the lingering questions about her own role in the affair. While she had never been charged, her silence during the trial left many with a sense of unease. She had known about her HIV status when she entered into the affair with Emma. She had known the risks, yet she never fully disclosed them. The ethical and moral implications of her actions weighed heavily on her. She never spoke publicly again about the affair or the trial, but her guilt continued to haunt her. The case had far-reaching consequences, not just for the individuals involved, but for the community at large. It sparked debates about the legal responsibility of individuals when it came to disclosing health conditions that could affect others. Questions were raised about the role of trust in relationships and whether the legal system should intervene when trust is broken in such a profound way. Locally, the town of Maplewood, once known for its peaceful streets and close-knit community, was left divided. Some sympathized with Caleb, believing he had been wronged in the most unimaginable way. Others, however, saw Emma as a victim of her circumstances, a woman trapped by her own mistakes and the pressures of a society that demands perfection. The case forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about the fragility of relationships, the complexities of human emotions, and the consequences of dishonesty. Nationally, the case brought attention to issues surrounding HIV disclosure and the ethics of intimacy in relationships. While the legal proceedings were focused on Emma's actions, the conversation quickly expanded to a broader social issue: how do we address the stigma surrounding HIV and ensure that people are informed, safe, and held accountable in their personal relationships? Advocates for HIV awareness used the case as a platform to push for greater education, urging people to be more open about their sexual health and to respect the rights and safety of their partners. Despite the finality of the court's verdict, doubts lingered in the minds of many. Was the sentence too lenient? Was the verdict fair given the public exposure of Emma's actions? Some argued that Caleb's victory had been hollow, that no amount of legal judgment could truly fix the emotional devastation he had endured. Others questioned whether Emma's conviction was justified, given the psychological factors that had influenced her decision to keep her HIV status hidden. The defense team, though unsuccessful in avoiding a conviction, continued to debate the case's ramifications. They believed that the sentence handed down to Emma was too harsh, that it failed to account for her remorse and the complexities of her mental and emotional state. There were rumors of potential appeals, but as time passed, they became less and less likely. The public had largely moved on, but the case remained a cautionary tale about the dangers of secrecy, the fragility of trust, and the consequences of betrayal. As Emma and Caleb walked their separate paths, each of them was forced to reflect on the choices they had made and the consequences of those decisions. Emma had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, seeking success and validation, only to lose everything she had worked for in a moment of reckless passion. Caleb had built a life of trust and love, only to watch it crumble under the weight of betrayal. And so, the question remained: when love and betrayal intersect, who truly pays the price? Is it the person who makes the decision to break trust, or is it the person left to pick up the shattered pieces of their life? In the end, both Emma and Caleb learned that while justice may be served in a courtroom, true healing comes from within, and it is something no legal system can provide. Thank you all for watching. I hope you found this story as captivating as it was thought-provoking. The journey of betrayal, consequences, and the search for justice is never simple, and it's important to reflect on the choices we make and their far-reaching impacts. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe for more gripping true crime stories like this one. I'd love to hear your opinions on the case and how you think justice should be served in such situations. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Let's see how far this story has traveled. Your engagement means a lot and helps bring these stories to a wider audience.